Okay there, everybody. How's it going? I was a little nervous there for a second. This is only my second time streaming in the last 2 years, maybe it's been. And so I wasn't sure if it was up. And I had no idea until I actually saw it like flying across the screen over here on the left. As always, I am Matt Yancic. Tonight, I'm working to stay calm and I'm not going to run a million details and try and keep everything fancy smancy. I'm just here tonight for maybe 45 minutes to an hour to hang out. Um, it is good to be back. It's nice to be back to streaming, especially like something kind of low pressure, like just spending 45 minutes to an hour talking about, well, self-promoting my game. But I have to admit, as I'm coming into the stream tonight, this is sort of a bittersweet weekend for me. I hadn't even realized this, and I talked about this, of course, in my last stream. But one of the reasons I've been kind of out of it for a while is just because I've had some big personal events kind of taking place in my life, and they kind of took up a lot of my time. Um, and my emotional energy. And as I'm streaming even now, I don't want to start things off on a kind of a low note. But as I'm streaming now, I just sort of realized that today is the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of the funeral of one of my best friends who passed away. And I don't want to turn it into a downer, but I did want to sort of just acknowledge that uh, because I don't know, it may affect me later on in the stream. But actually, exactly 1 year ago today, I was dressed in a Star Trek uniform. Trust me, this makes sense. Delivering a eulogy that paid tribute to my friend in a manner similar to that of Captain Kirk in Star Trek II for Mr. Spock. Um, so I just wanted to sort of celebrate my buddy's my buddy's life. I was actually sort of thinking like, yeah, I'm not gonna. I think I'm not gonna go online tonight. I hadn't realized the anniversary, but then I thought my buddy doesn't have the chance to go online, and if he had the chance to go online and do something silly and goofy like this, I am sure that he would have done it in a second. So with that in mind, let us get the stream going. Um, so last week, when we last left our hero, Matt Yancic, he had very broadly sort of explained why he'd been gone, but I had also been talking about Bone and Metal. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to let you know, Frank was my good friend who went along with me. He was also dressed in a Star Trek uniform with me, holding up a flag of the United Federation of Planets. I know all of this just seems really out of context. We were getting a lot of like Vulcan salutes as we were sort of sneaking into the I guess it was a funeral home or maybe a church or something like that. It was a rather unconventional eulogy that we delivered, but it was very much in the vein of something that our best friend would have loved. Um, so at any rate, Frank, thank you very much. It's nice to see you there. He's watching from Valhalla. Raise a glass. I had thought about maybe that's Steve. So this friend was friends with all of us, which is why they're all here maybe tonight. Um, yeah, I thought about pulling out a glass and maybe enjoying a glass tonight, but I don't know if drinking and streaming is really the best thing for me. But at any rate, the stream goes on. So last week I'd been talking about why I'd been missing, and I'd given you a very broad overview for Bone and Metal. And tonight I kind of wanted to get a little bit more granular and explain some things about the system so that people going into it expecting exactly Scotty's Easy D6 aren't going to be disappointed, because kind of the way that Ridley Scott spoke of Prometheus in relationship to his original film Alien, so too is Bone and Metal to Easy D6. And Ridley Scott said about Prometheus that it very much contained the DNA of the original Alien without actually really being Alien. And so too, Bone and Metal is very much like that. So last week I had explained that the deeper I kind of got into the setting, the more I sort of realized I had to make a lot, well, what I thought was going to be a few, but turned out to be a lot of changes and adaptations and tweaks just so that it sort of evoked the spirit of Bone and Metal. And to recap here, Bone and Metal is set in a feudal Japan, in a parallel alternate history universe in which 6 tremendous alien artifacts have impacted on the main island of Nekon called White Whisper. And Nekon is my analog for Japan, and White Whisper would be Honshu. And these alien artifacts have changed the course of history, um, wiping out a large portion of the human population and uplifting animals to the dominant species on our planet. Um, and so the animals naturally have sort of adapted a lot of the ways of the humans, but they've sort of gone off on their own path in an offshoot sort of culture, society and culture, with some differences to what you would expect in feudal Japan. And of course, um, the story itself, the setting, takes place about 120 years after the impact of those alien artifacts, somewhere roughly in the early 1700s. Um, and so as I was building this, and this is, to be honest, it's the first time I've ever put so much effort into something like this. I quickly sort of started to understand, um, and this is going to be something that many of you who have done this before or who are probably been deeper into RPGs, and when I say deeper, I mean really into the mechanics, have always known. But I sort of realized that a lot of the rolling uh, didn't quite work for the setting. And well, you know what? That's wrong to say. It wasn't that the rolling didn't work. It was that I sort of noticed that when I tweaked it in one direction or another, it worked better. Um, and those small tweaks led to sort of like major tweaks in the system. So for those of you that have never played Easy D6, and maybe for those of you that have, Easy D6 basically works. It's just as its namesake evokes. It works with a simple 6-sided die that you roll. And variously along the way, you may be asked to roll at a boon, which is to say roll 2 1d6s and take the higher, or at a bane, which is to roll 2 1d6s and take the lower result of each roll. And what I noticed, I guess, as I started developing my own kind of inclinations, as Scotty calls them, for the game, is that yes, Steve, it is Akira Kurosawa's Planet of the Apes. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe it is. I don't know. I guess it kind of is. I'd never thought about it that way. Um, wow, that kind of takes the way I'd thought about the game and sort of the setting and turns it on its side. But that's I'd never thought about that. But I was going to call it Akira Kurosawa's black and white samurai cinema meets the Dark Crystal in the swashbuckling spirit of Star Wars. That's the log line that I typically use. Um, but at any rate, as I got deeper into it and I was starting to build inclinations, I kind of noticed something about myself uh, And that was that I just kept throwing boons or banes at just about everything. And after a while, to me, and I came up with 40 or 50 new inclinations, which are called adaptations in my world. I sort of noticed that it just seemed kind of boring to me. It didn't evoke the feel that I was going for. And Scotty did it a lot better than me. Like if you look at his inclinations, he got very creative about he wasn't just throwing out boons for everything. He was giving bonuses in some instances, and there were some situational advantages too. So I had to sort of go back and restudy what he had done and apply that toward my own adaptations or inclinations. And one of my first sort of modifications that I decided to go with, and I'm not going to talk all about the origins and how I got here or whatever. I'm just going to lay down the groundwork and the foundation so everybody kind of understands how the system basically works. But one of the first modifications I sort of came up with was turning the game, the rules, the dice rolls into um, into a quasi dice pool system. And so I'm going to put this up on the screen for you right now. Right now, Bone and Metal system runs on a base 1d6, which can be tweaked either upward or downward. Go upward, you are giving the roll advantage, and you're taking the highest of the roll. When you go downward, you are giving your rolls a disadvantage. So the base roll is known as a base 1d6, and through the game, you'll be asked to the default setting for any one roll in the system. If it tells you to roll, it's going to be made at a base 1d6. However, when you acquire adaptations, which again are my version of inclinations, you will be getting boons and bounties, right? So a boon, which I didn't actually write here correctly, I'm sorry for that. Let me see if I can fix that. A boon is at a 2d6. A bounty is at a 3d6. And in both cases, you take the highest roll, right? So there will be certain adaptations that you will acquire, and they will allow you to, let's say, your a certain sort of attack in a certain situation. When you're attacking, say, from darkness, your character may take an adaptation that allows you to attack at a 2d6 or a 3d6, which therefore, and then gives you advantage. When there are certain situations, however, conditions, where you are at a disadvantage, say they may be situational or they might be conditional on at certain times or certain places, then you roll at what I've been calling a bane, which is a 2d6, and you take the lowest result, or a blunder, which is a 3d6, and again you take the lowest result. Now, this is the basic scale. And so the problem, though, that I sort of realized at a certain point as I was making all of these adaptations up was that what happens if you combine a couple? What happens if you're in a favorable condition? Maybe you're attacking with a certain adaptation that gives you a 2d6, but you have like Anakin, or I'm sorry, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, you have the high ground over Anakin Skywalker. How can we tweak that? And so I created something called centering and uncentering. And centering is when you increase the roll by a step, so from a 2d6 to a 3d6. And uncentering is when you decrease it. So maybe you have a certain adaptation that allows you to attack at a 2d6, but there's a condition where maybe you have the low ground, someone else has the high ground, and the target creature that you're attacking has the high ground. And so you're kind of you kind of mitigate, you kind of cancel out your advantage and you uncenter your roll. So your 2d6 attack roll goes down to a base, right? So centering and uncentering allows you to step up or step down. And it's typically something that is applied by the game master, which in Easy D6 is called the rabble rouser, but in my game is called the alpha, as in the strongest character in the pack, or the strongest animal in the pack. So with that kind of in mind, I wanted to show you a basic build, or what the character builds look like in Bone and Metal, so that you have some context and some idea of what I'm talking about as I explain how the characters work, and how, because I'm also going to get into a little bit of the adaptations as well as what are called techniques that are more generalized, that come with the characters. So let's take a look at the characters, the basic build of any character in Bone and Metal. So there are basically 5 parts to any character. So there is your species, which is the type of animal that you are. There is the archetype, and the archetype is basically it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's your career, but it's the type of character that you're playing in a very broad sense. So you'll notice here you have the Shadow, the Blade, the Sentinel, the Storm, the Hunter, and the Mystic. Each one kind of covers a different category or class of character, a type. With the archetypes, we have also techniques. And techniques are a form of adaptation that is not specific to any one archetype, and they can be taken by any character. We'll get into sort of explaining, or I'll get into explaining some of those later. Well, Steve, I'm glad you appreciate my assiduous adherence to alliteration. That's a very kind thing of you to say. It's also nice of you to be contributing to the chat, just adding things in there. I didn't really advertise this. I got to be honest. I'm boons, banes, bounties, and blunders. You know what's funny, Steve? And I don't know how I feel about this. I did it to be, I don't know, for fun. But now I'm just worried that making everything a B makes it difficult to remember, because you can't, I mean, I guess you can sort of remember. Okay, well, what's the roll called when you do 3d6? A boon? No, wait, it's a super boon? No, it's a what? A bounty? I don't know. I don't know, Steve. It's something I constantly debate in my head. I had thought about making everything above a base a certain letter, and then everything below a certain letter, and then making the base just a B. Maybe calling everything above something that starts with A, and everything below something that starts with C. So you can just say, oh, A is the highest, B is the middle, and then C is the lowest. I don't know. That's just stuck with it. That's been one of the long-term things that's stuck with the game since, for probably at least a year and a half now or so. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, techniques are a form of adaptations, which again are a form of inclinations in Scotty's game. And here's maybe one of the biggest differences to the game, is that to sort of evoke that Kurosawa samurai feel, I had created something called the honor code. There's 6 different honor codes: harmony, strength, connection, purpose, understanding, and conviction. And each one of these honor codes is something that you as a character actually takes on. Oh, you like the alliteration, Steve? It's not confusing? Well, that's good to know. Because I got to be honest, sometimes it confuses even me. And every time I hear a player say, "Wait, what's it called?" I just cringe inside, and I think I got to name these something else. But we'll go with it for now. But at any rate, every character takes on an honor code, and an honor code, in a way, is an engine that drives your power. So in Easy D6, when the game starts, I believe everybody gets 3 karma points. And karma are used to adjust rolls up or down. So 1 karma point is equivalent to 1 pip on a 6-sided die. So if you roll a 4, for instance, and your target is the result you really want is a 5, you can spend 1 karma and increase your roll. In Easy D6, we have honor code. An honor code starts every player at the beginning of every game with 5 honor points. And there's a reason I'm give you more than I would give you karma. So honor points can be spent to increase your roll, but it can also be spent to unlock higher versions, stronger versions of adaptations and techniques. And I'll get into that later on. And you earn your honor points by adhering to your honor code. So when you are when you exhibit, you know, an example of purpose, of understanding, of conviction in the game, the alpha or other players will nominate you to receive a certain number of honor points, and those can be received on a scale from 1 to 3, depending on how strong an example of your honor code you've exhibited. So you're constantly earning them through the game, but you're also spending them at the same time. So they do tend to fluctuate up and down through the game. And adding a layer to that honor code and the points that you accumulate is the fact that you can spend honor points in order to upgrade your character. And this is another big difference between Easy D6 and what I've come up with in my own game. I had sort of decided from very early on that I wanted the characters to be able to upgrade. And upgrading is called the 6-fold path. There are 6 levels to upgrading. And at each one, you qualify for more and more upgrades. And when I get into like what a basic character, or when I get into what an archetype looks like, we can talk about ways that you can upgrade your characters and your archetypes. But so the idea is that you're balancing honor points. You're not just spending them all the time. And in order to earn them, I think, and it's worked pretty well so far in the gaming playtests that we've done. But in order to earn those points, you need to sort of act in alignment with your honor code, which keeps you on the straight and narrow. So you're not just going crazy and not sort of like becoming what are they called? Traveling murder hobos. The idea is that the more you adhere to your honor code, the more you're rewarded for your behavior, which helps you unlock your character in not just immediately in the game by upgrading abilities, but also upgrading your character in general and opening up access to more techniques and adaptations. So finally, after the honor code, we have your social class, wealth, and pursuits. So in Bone and Metal, there are 6 social classes. And I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but I've very much kept the theme of using 6 and for everything. But there are 6 social classes. The unnamed, who are considered to be kind of like the lowest of the low. These are characters that have no name, literally and figuratively, they are not acknowledged in the Imperial Handbook of Names. Following that, we have the named, who meet the minimum requirements of being a, a citizen of Nakan by having a family name which is in the Imperial Registry. Stewards, who are mildly successful, um, typically the wealthiest of the lower class. They own small shops, or they might have small businesses, and a steady income. The bannered are those members of the army, the Imperial Army or the Imperial Navy, and they are the only residents of Nakan that are allowed to carry weapons. Though I would add that everybody sneaks a weapon here and there, so don't worry too much about that. Everybody, all of your characters will be carrying weapons. Um, Following this, we have the noble classes, and there are a dozen major houses and maybe a lot more minor houses. And then, of course, on top of that, we have the imperial family. So that's the basic look and feel of most of the characters. And so when you create your character, you're going to be sort of diving into each one of those things, and working on those. Oh, and I didn't mention wealth and pursuits. Wealth and pursuits come with your social class. And depending on who you are, you may have access to more or less wealth, and you may have differing kinds of pursuits, which are like hobbies or professions you had in your background, which can um, add advantages to certain situations in very specific niche situations. So, for example, if you happen to used to be a I'm trying to think of something, a oh my goodness, oh, a cook or a chef, then your cooking or chefing background will come in handy for you in very specific situations where you may need those abilities. Um, okay, that's all the dry stuff. Let me give you some really dry stuff now. So I want to give you a look at a few of the archetypes, and I don't want to give all of them away, so I just picked the first two. I wanted to show everybody an example of what an archetype looks like, what an adaptation looks like, and what a technique looks like, and the sort of wording that I'm going for. So let's start off with the basic build, archetype build for a shadow. Now, a shadow is essentially a ninja in this game, but I didn't want it to be so specific where you had to play a ninja. So in this game, a shadow is basically an infiltrator, and you can kind of play them almost any way that you want. Um, each shadow comes with a base of 3 strikes, an armor save, a light armor save of a 6 plus. And if you notice, I've added 2 other types of save, a mystic save and a resolved save. Um, so the main form of magic in my game is known as mysticism. And this is another case where, as I kind of got deeper into it, I realized that for my setting, I was really going to need a few other types of saves. And the mystic save was really the big one. So the mystic save represents, of course, the armor save is a literal, it's a save against being attacked, right? It is what you need to roll in order to keep a blow that hits you from doing any damage. The mystic save actually is your resistance to mysticism. Um, and each archetype starts out with a different level, a different resistance. And the final save, the resolve save, is more of a generic catch-all. It is for situations where you're not really sure. A GM knows it's not a sword glancing off the armor, and it's not Mystic Blast that's glancing off someone's mystic energy. It could be something very simple. And the example I think that Scotty uses in um, in ECD6 is with falling. So you fall from a great height. Or, but I've actually made this broader. So it's falling from a great height. It could be mental resistance to something. It could be any number of different tests that don't fit under the armor save or the mystic save. It's not a perfect system. I'm not completely happy with the idea of it. And so I've kept the numbers kind of average. There are some that are tweaked a little bit higher, which is to say lighter. And then there are some that are tweaked lower, which is to say have stronger, right? But there'll be plenty of opportunity for you and your players and your alpha to sort of tweak those things. But that's the idea with those. So let's take another look here. You may notice that the characters come with boons and banes. In the case of a shadow, the shadow has a boon, a single boon they can choose in either deceit, gymnastics, perception, stealth, or sleight of hand. And this is another area where I kind of veered a little bit from Easy D6. I actually came up with a list of 16 skills that all characters have access to. And depending on your archetype, you can take a boon in one of a certain set of skills that are aligned with being, in this case, a shadow. But with that comes a trade-off, banes. And shadows also need to take a bane in monster lore, performance, or persuasion. And the idea is that with your boon, with the good points, also come some bad points or some negatives with your archetype. And the idea was to give each archetype a little bit more of a feel when it comes to their skills. So those 16 skills I actually don't have. I'm sorry, I don't have a slide for that. But they cover like a broad sort of swath of things that you'll be using to interact with the world around you. And then finally here at first form, you'll find, and so first form is your equivalent of the first level character. A shadow will choose one shadow adaptation, and an adaptation is something that is like an inclination, but it's specifically geared only toward a shadow. Every archetype will have around 14 or 15 adaptations, which are specifically available only to those archetypes. And the idea was to give each archetype its own feel, obviously. You won't be taking all 14 or 15, and even by the end of the game, you won't have all 14 or 15. You might have 3 or 4 of those, maybe. Maybe at the most 6, I think it is. But you take those in order to customize your character in a way that makes them very different and feel different than other characters. And I'm going to show you in just a moment here a couple examples of techniques and adaptations that your characters will take. And so with the adaptation will also come techniques. Techniques are broadly available abilities that are slightly watered down from adaptations, not quite as strong, that allow you to sort of customize your character beyond just your archetype. And they were really created so that if you want a little bit of a fighter, if you want a little bit of a paladin, In this case, it would be a blade or a sentinel. If you want a little bit of those, if you want a little bit of a mystic even, you could take one or two of those techniques. And now, granted, they are a little bit watered down, but you could add a little bit of flavor. So if you are a shadow, you might have some very nice fighting ability. Not quite as nice as a blade, but you can take some skills, some techniques that are similar. So let me give you an idea of what an adaptation in my game looks like. And again, adaptations and techniques are basically inclinations. The adaptations are very specific only to the archetype, and the techniques are broadly available to all. So here is an example of an adaptation that is exclusively available to a shadow. This one happens to be called Acorns Become Oaks. And the idea of this is that you are a skilled infiltrator that is good at spreading rumors or manipulating information. So with this, and I don't want you to sit there and read it because it's pretty boring to just sit there, but with this basic adaptation, you can go to a nexus or a point of where a crossroads where many different people come through. And after spending an hour or so at this crossroads, you can plant information that will spread throughout a community. And now community is kind of up to you and your alpha to sort of, the alpha obviously has final say, but using acorns become oaks, the shadow can spread a rumor which provides some sort of advantages later on in the game. And those advantages essentially come in 4 hours later when you return, and on tasks related to the information that you planted, you gain 2 boons to use, right? And again, a lot of this one happens to be a little bit more narrative in its design and less mechanical. I'll show you some mechanical stuff later. But the idea behind this is that the shadow is an infiltrator that can control and manipulate information. And I wanted to sort of represent that with an adaptation. Now, there's a technique version of this, which is a little bit watered down, a little bit different. But so if you are a sentinel or a mystic that would like to do something sort of like this, you can take it, but it's never going to be quite as potent as the one that the shadow has. And finally, with this adaptation, you'll see at the very end, I have something called a flourish. And a flourish is an example of how you spend your honor points. If you wish, you can spend 1 honor point in this case as a free action, so it doesn't count as anything toward your movement, to add to lower the crit threshold. So rather than critting only on a 6, you can crit on a 5, right? So let's say you're really desperate. You really want to make sure that you gain the advantage through the use of acorns become oaks. When you go back and return, you can say and declare before you attempt to use your 2 boons, you can say, I'm going to spend 1 honor point. I'm going to lower the threshold from a 6 to a 5. Adding a little bit of an edge. And of course, as most people I think know, getting a crit is a great success and allows you to roll again for more success. So that's an example of an adaptation that the shadow has. And I'll show you another one, which is a little bit more specific in this case to combat, right? This is called Disappear into Shadows. And the idea is, again, because shadows are sort of master infiltrators, they are adept at blending in and sort of moving in the darkness. And with this, when you make a successful attack from some sort of unseen position, and I learned so much about like how to phrase stuff when I was writing this, because I would say like from darkness. And then I realized, well, that's not quite broad enough. I want the idea to be that wherever they are. If they're unseen, if they happen to be in the darkness, that's great, but they can be unseen in the daylight as well, hidden behind cover or something. But if you make a successful strike from behind or from an unseen position, you can immediately move to another position within near range and remain hidden or unseen. So the idea is that, let's say you as a shadow are either hiding in darkness or you're hiding behind a tree. You can move out very quickly, and if you make a successful strike, you have the option to roll and to move back into a position where you are unseen and stay unseen. So I kept thinking about scenes in movies where ninjas would pop out of like the darkness or pop out from behind a tree, and they would strike and then quickly go back behind that tree or back into that darkness. And I wanted to something that evoked that feel. So for a flourish, in this case, I've tried to make it a little bit simpler. And in this case, it makes it actually a lot, not just simpler, it makes it easier. Rather than rolling, you can just spend 1 honor point after you've made your successful strike to remain hidden. Go back into a hidden position. And while this seems very powerful, the idea is that it costs an honor point to carry out. And so the more honor points you spend, you may gain a lot of glory in that moment. You may like, wow, he did 2 or 3 of these in a row. But at the end of the day, 2 or 3 honor points less at the end of the session is almost an entire level that you can, or actually a part of a level. First upgrade is 3 points. Second is 4, and last one is 5. I think it was. That's what it's currently at. I mean, that's subject to change. Please don't quote me on that. Or maybe it's 4, 5, and 6. I think the first one is 4 points. The second one is 5, and the third one is 6. And there are 3 upgrades per form, right? So at the end of your game, you may have had a really awesome number of strikes from successful strikes from hidden positions, but unfortunately you don't have any honor points left over to upgrade. So that's something to just be aware of. Now, let me give you an example of a technique. Okay, so this is just some basic ideas for a shadow build. Here's a technique which is available to all. And I made this one sort of because I wanted to do something that was similar to that character in every movie that works best alone, and they move faster when they don't have any baggage with them. This technique is called Lone Wolf Way, and this gives you advantages when you work on your own. Of course, the disadvantage is that you need to separate from the rest of your pack, and you don't have the advantage of having your pack mates with you. But when operating solo, you move at twice your normal speed, and you gain a boon on tasks related to examination, stealth, and wilderness. And again, those are 3 of the 16 skills that I have built for the game. Be surprised, and you may always choose to go first when engaging a target creature. And then when you engage that creature, after having approached it solo, you gain 3 boons to use at your disposal during that one combat. Now, keep in mind that you're working alone and there may be other creatures around, but the idea is to emphasize the lone wolf. The focus in this case, for 1 honor point, you can add a +1 bonus to each of your 3 boons. Again, a lot of these are subject to change because I'm still play testing a lot of them. Sometimes they seem a little stronger than I want, but that's the general idea of where I'm going with uh, with adaptations and techniques. So let me show you a blade build. Now the blade is essentially a fighter in the bone and metal world, um, and the blade acts basically as a strategist and, like I said, as a fighter. Um, the blade emphasizes a different set of boons and banes, but you can see that they also have. Oh, I didn't. I'm so sorry. I didn't. As you can see, I put shadow adaptations when I should just put blade adaptations. Oh, got here late. Can you cover how boons work real quick? Yes, sure. That's the wonderful thing about live YouTubing. Thanks very much, J Briars. Sorry, I'm probably saying that wrong. Yeah, let me show you basically how they work. So, one of the differences between ECG6 and my system is that I have a built-in dice pool system. Every roll starts with a base 1d6, and depending on whether you are favored or unfavored, or in the case of my game, whether you are centered or uncentered, you push the roll up or down, taking the highest or the lowest. So let's say you start with a base, you might have a situation where you have the high ground, in which case your alpha, who in this case is the game master, would allow you to center a roll being on the high ground and roll at a boon. And I'm so sorry, in this in this uh, in this slide, it says that the boon is made at 3d6. It's actually 2d6. I messed that up. I should have written 2d6. But the boons work by adding advantage and disadvantage, going up to as many as 3d6, taking the highest, or down as 3d6 and taking the lowest in the case of a blunder. So they go up and down. So I hope that kind of answers your question. It's nothing too complex, and it's definitely nothing that I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It's and in fact, I think I've seen this. I want to say I've seen this used somewhere before. I don't remember where, but it's probably something that's been used in a lot of places. So, at any rate, let's take a look again at that blade. Um, but the blade now has different sorts of boons that are available, and a different sort of boon which they are forced to endure. Oh, good. Okay, I'm glad that that helped. I'm glad that it helps. You can always rewind. And truth be told, I don't know if I explained it in the best way possible. I'm just winging this whole thing. I made some slides up earlier today. I'm having a little bit of a weird weekend, as you'll probably figure out when maybe if you go back to the beginning and you watch from the beginning. But it's been a little bit of a weird weekend. So I'm a little bit out of sorts, but I sort of told myself, like, I don't know about you guys, but I have this very meticulous personality that wants to do everything perfectly. And I just sort of decided recently that I wanted to start just sort of doing stuff and doing it for fun, and not everything has to be perfect. So, which is why my slides are not perfect. Um, at any rate, with the blade, let's get into a blade adaptation, which for those of you that are just sort of joining in, a blade adaptation is a kind of inclination that is available only to the blade archetype. Here's one: killing grounds. So with killing grounds, you gain boons when you know your surroundings. So I try to bake in a little bit of give and take here, and the idea is that you can either show up early and study an area for 30 minutes, or if you have some sort of prior knowledge of an area, like maybe you grew up there, it's something you can work out with your alpha. You're able to sort of figure out very specific advantages and a very specific strategy to fighting on those surroundings. So you gain 3 boons to use for attacks or armor saves. And again, this is very loosey-goosey, and you're going to find out that I am in general. I'm more of a narrative guy, and I really like to sort of like promote discussion between, not too much to bog the game down, but discussion between the alpha and the game master and the player, which would be the pack member. Um, for to facilitate the game. So the idea of what a specific area is could be a battlefield, it could be a hidden fortress, or maybe a mountain, in this case, that you played on as a child. And so this is up to the alpha's discretion. Now, for a flourish in this particular case, you can spend an honor point, and you may add a single +2 bonus to one of your 3 boons. So it doesn't have to be declared, but you can add it afterward. And the idea is to give a little bit of an advantage to those, to make the blade feel like they're a strategist. Let's take a look at another adaptation. Flawless riposte, or at least that's how I've always pronounced it. I don't know if that's right or not. I'm a little embarrassed to say. How many of you people out there read books, read a certain word all the time, and you don't know how? I always called it flawless riposte. But how many of you guys read a book? You read the same word all the time, and you never learn how it's said. You kind of know, you can kind of guess who the readers are by that. Anyway, so with this, you as a blade see a vulnerability. And this, again, when I noticed that like boons and banes started, or boons started and bounties started adding like really, really too many advantages and making characters too powerful, I realized I had to come up with limitations on some of them. This is available only once per combat, right? So you could, if you have 3 combats, you can use it 3 times. But it's very situational. So in this case, once per combat, when a target creature attacks you and misses, and you don't have to make an armor save, as a free action, you may immediately make a counterattack at a boon against the same target creature. And the idea was to sort of evoke that feel that a fighter can sort of read their opponent. And someone comes in, they miss, and they open themselves up to some sort of vulnerability where the blade can sort of get in there. And again, it's very situational. It happens only once in combat, and it can only happen when they have missed you. Essentially, when they strike, when they attempt to strike and they miss, you're able to make a quick sucker attack at a vulnerable spot. Let's take a look at the flourish for that. And so for 1 honor point, if your counterattack successfully deals 1 strike of damage, then the creature's next attack is made at a bane, right? So I'm not adding more power to, in this case, I'm not adding more power to the blade. I'm trying to disadvantage the other target creature. Because again, one of the things I noticed when I started adding boons and bounties and bonuses, I noticed that like things just started to stack so high, it got crazy. So, oh, thank you, Eric. Repost like I'm reposting something. Eric Whitmer's resume is telling me that I'm pronouncing repost correctly. So if that's good enough for Eric, that's good enough for me. But anyway, as I was saying, with the flourish, I noticed that adding and stacking all that stuff on top of characters became super powerful. And the issue that I had, thanks, Eric, the issue that I had was that in this game, a lot of the monsters have 2 or 3 strikes of damage that they can take. And so you could take out an entire oh, fencer from age 8 to 18. That's right. I forgot about that. Eric, I forgot about that. That's pretty cool. How does the how does the adaptation check out then? Do you think the look and feel of it evokes the feel? Let me know, Eric. Let me know, please. But anyway, um, the thing that I noticed is that the more I stack damage, the quicker the enemies were to die. And I was trying to think of things kind of on the other side. Oh, good. I'm glad it checks out. Thanks, Eric. Um, I was trying to think of things on the other side to help, uh, to add flavor to it, but at the same time not make the characters too powerful. And so my idea was to give the character which you have just sort of sucker struck, a bit of a disadvantage on their next attack roll. Let's take a look at a final technique that I would have. In this case, I'm just adding it to the plate. Anyone can take it. This is kind of like one of my favorites, and it's kind of like a last stand sort of thing. And it's called Rage of the Wolverine. And this originally came from one thing, the end of Throne of Blood, where Toshiro Mifune is shot full of dozens of arrows, and he kind of continues to sort of struggle along. He doesn't actually make any successful attacks. He ends up dying. But I like the idea of continuing to fight even after you reached, after you were technically dead. And so I was sort of playing around with this idea of making a last stand, which doesn't necessarily have to be a last stand. I wanted it to be close enough to a last stand, but not something that completely killed you. And by the way, it's called Rage of the Wolverine because, surprise, surprise, Wolverine is like one of my favorite characters. But at any rate, when G pool, which is your damage, your hit points, reaches 0, you do continue to operate at a blunder. And your next attack deals 2 strikes. So any additional strikes of G damage to you will cause permanent death. But if you make it, you immediately collapse after your strike, and your pack mates have 4 chances to restore 1 G point to your G pool with 2 successful resolve saves. So that's going back to the idea of the resolve saves that I said characters in this case kind of have inbuilt, though I will say I'm toying with the idea of pulling them out of the classes and just making them a generic thing that you do with certain abilities. But at any rate, your pack mates have 4 chances to restore your G pool to 1. And so again, with the flourish, for each honor point you spend, you operate at a bane rather than a blunder. And now just to sort of refresh everybody's memory, the blunder is 3d6 and you take the lowest. So you can step up to a 2d6 and roll at a bane, which helps you theoretically make sort of strike in a dramatic way. So the idea here is that the adaptations give each archetype a certain flavor. And then the techniques allow those who are kind of, in their own archetypes, allows them to branch out and taste a little bit. I get the feeling my pack mates would just let me die. I don't know, Steve. I guess it depends on your behavior during the game. I think they would be willing to help you out, but I can't really say for sure. Your behavior is pretty good in most games. Yeah, you kind of ride that line with some of your humor, but I think that they would save you. So I don't know. That's kind of the whole stream for tonight. It's been about an hour or so. If you've made it with me this far, congratulations. that seemed like a little dry to me. Maybe I was getting a little bit too much into it, but I just wanted to give everybody an idea of what sort of characters will be possible using bone and metal, and what my version of inclinations, which is to say adaptations and techniques, will will be like. Um, so that's kind of it. I think things are winding down for me right now. Um, Again, though, thank you very much for watching. I hope that it was kind of interesting to you, and maybe even a little bit informative. Um, but of course, if you want, feel free to comment below. We're going offline now, and those comments actually mean a lot to me. Oh, thank you. You loved it. Thanks very much. You know, I gotta say, JB, can I call you JB or maybe JBR? I I learned a lot about systems, and I am by no means an expert. Like since a kid, I've always been more of a narrative guy, and I'm not a math guy. And one of my coping mechanisms for numbers and math is patterns. I look for patterns. And then when I see patterns, I'm better able. Oh, James. Okay, cool. Thanks, James. Um, One of the things I look for are patterns because they help me understand how numbers work. Oh boy, there's a little thumbs up. Um, and these patterns kind of like um, the patterns help me basically identify how something works. And I wish that um, I knew more about the actual creation, like how to like balance a game. But I looked for patterns in the adaptations, in the techniques, in what. Um, oh, you know what? I think we're frozen now, but you can still hear me. I think. Um, but I look for patterns, and I look for uh, things I can kind of latch onto in order to better understand the way that something works. So I'm glad that hearing it for you was a little bit interesting for you. I'm sorry I didn't get, as much into it. Maybe next week we'll get into more of it, but that's just a general idea of how this works for now. So I can see that my screen is frozen for some reason, but um, fortunately, let me see if I wonder if I could do something like this and see if it'll. I don't know. No, it's still frozen. Still frozen. Okay. Well, I think this is a sign. I think this means I've talked too much. To all of you that tuned in, James, thank you very much for coming in. It's been good having you in the last couple of streams. I really appreciate your support and I appreciate your comments. Please feel free to, if you can, come join me. Hopefully next Sunday we'll do something around the same time, and we'll see. But thank you all very much for joining me, and everybody out there, have yourselves a great night.